Hello everyone, Greg Olson here with the Jasper County Conservation Department, and today we are going to talk about animal adaptations. Now there are two different types of adaptations, one being structural and the other being behavioral. Structural adaptation is a unique feature, has to do with the animal's body that helps them to be able to survive in the habitat where they live. So for instance, birds, one of their adaptations would be their beaks. Now all three of these birds, the rose-breasted grosbeak, the indigo bunting, and the northern cardinal, if you compare all three beaks, you will notice that they're pretty similar as far as their shape and their size. So this type of beak is called a seed-crushing beak, and they are specialized in harvesting things like sunflower seeds. They can use that short, stocky beak to be able to crush the outside of the seed and get to the meat on the inside. Another different style of beak would be like this guy here. This is a northern flicker, and their beak is kind of like a pair of tweezers. So the northern flickers, compared to the other woodpeckers, these guys will usually feed on the ground. So if they find an ant or a beetle, they can use their beak and their sticky tongue. Their tongues actually have little barbs on the end that they can use to capture their prey. Other woodpeckers, like a downy woodpecker or a hairy woodpecker, they will drill into the tree and then stick their tongue inside and catch a larva or an insect of some sort. Another cool structural adaptation that woodpeckers have, their tongues are really long, so when it goes back into their skull, it will actually wrap around the backside of their head or their skull. So it sits in between the skin and the skull itself, and a lot of the times in the classroom I tell the kids that woodpeckers can taste their brain with their tongue. It's actually not inside of the skull itself, but in between the skin and the skull. Okay. Another structural adaptation that birds have would be their feet. So if we look at something like this Cooper's hawk, birds of prey, they have talons, sharp talons on their feet that they use to catch things like mice and voles and shrews. And so that's another structural adaptation that birds have. They use their feet in different ways, and birds of prey depend on their sharp talons to catch their food. Looking back at the northern flicker, if I were to have you draw a picture of a bird's foot on a piece of paper, I would assume that you would probably put 3 toes in the front and 1 in the back, right? Woodpeckers are a little bit different. See if I can get a close-up shot of this for you. Woodpeckers actually have 2 toes in the front and 2 toes in the back, and that's a cool adaptation because a lot of the times when woodpeckers land on a tree, they don't land on a limb if they're looking for food. They'll land on that vertical trunk, and having 2 toes in the front and 2 toes in the back will allow them to get a better grip on the bark so that they can find their food. And their feathers, if you look at the northern flicker's tail feathers, you can see how stiff they are. So when they land on a tree, the first thing that they usually do is prop their tail up against the trunk, and that gives them stability when they're drilling into the tree and looking for their food. So those are some examples of some structural adaptations. Behavioral adaptations has to do with how that animal acts or behaves. So a couple of different behavioral adaptations that animals have. One would be something like hibernation. So like our bat species here in Iowa, during the winter time, they hibernate because there's no food available for them to eat during the winter. They eat insects, and we don't have insects during the winter time. Another one would be something like migration. So if I can find, where'd my little bird go? Here we go. So if we look at something like this ruby-throated hummingbird, hopefully I can get it in focus for you. So ruby-throated hummingbirds, they will migrate thousands of miles every year. So during the winter, they travel down to places like Mexico, Central and South America. because they're, again, kind of like the bats, there's no food for them here during the winter. They feed on nectar, and so during the winter time they have to go somewhere warm where there's flowers available for them to collect the nectar. And then they make the journey thousands of miles back to Iowa, possibly on up into Canada. So hopefully you guys learned a little bit more about adaptations. Remember, there's two different kinds, structural and behavioral. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time.